Thank you very much. I saw somebody just putting in chat that they're coming in from Uzbekistan. That's where I am. Uh, I'm really excited to be in Samarkand. If you see behind me how green it is, that's because Samarkand is an oasis. Uh, Uzbekistan is mostly desert climate, actually, even drier than the grasslands or steppe region, but it is a place of oases. And in the last few days, we've been to three of the most famous of these oases, all on the Silk routes to the ancient city of Khiva, the ancient city of Bukhara, and the ancient city of Samarkand. And they're all filled with history. Let me just bring you up to date again on the journey itself. Remember that we started in Rome, uh, carrying the Pope's message, his new encyclical, Magnifica Humanitas, and with the Pope's blessing to give the encyclical to the leaders that we meet along the way. We went from Rome to Venice, which was the true starting point of the Polo expedition of 1271. Remember that the Polo family, Marco and his father, Niccolo, and uncle Maffeo, were of the merchant class of a very rich Venice. Venice was located strategically in the Adriatic to be able to be the western end of the east-west trade, and Venetian merchants were very active throughout the Mediterranean and the Black Sea region, Crimea, and the uh, main hub of trade, Constantinople. So we went from Venice eastward across the Balkan Peninsula, what was the former Yugoslavia, and today includes the nations of Slovenia, Croatia, and Serbia. And then we continued eastward to Bulgaria uh, and reached the Black Sea. From Bulgaria, we reached Constantinople, as the Polos had done 750 years earlier. And from Constantinople, we continued eastward across the southern coast of the Black Sea, which is the northern coast of the Anatolian Peninsula. We went to several of the ancient Silk Road stops, visited a caravanserai, that is a place where the caravans would stop, water their animals, rest, eat, sleep, in Samson on the north coast of Anatolia. We went to Trabzon and saw an ancient monastery established, according to tradition, in the 4th century AD, so 1700 years ago. We went, continued on to the city of Rize, which is President Erdogan's birthplace, and then from there crossed into the Caucasus. The Caucasus are the countries near the Caucasus mountain range. The South Caucasus are the three countries, Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. We went the northern part of the South Caucasus. South Caucasus means south of the Grand Caucasus crest line. It's actually technically in Asia. North of the uh, Grand Caucasus ridgeline is Russia, and that's technically Europe. So we were in Asia, in Georgia, uh, not only the coastal Black Sea port city of Georgia, Batumi, but then going eastward to the capital of Georgia, Tbilisi, and then continuing eastward across the South Caucasus to the Caspian Sea city of Baku, capital of Azerbaijan. In the Caspian, we hit the oil-rich region. Baku is itself a city that in history was called the City of Flames because the oil and gas is so close to the surface that there would be perpetual flames. And temples were built to celebrate this natural phenomenon and became centers of Zoroastrian religion dating back already 2,500 years ago. So we went to a temple of fire, which was a long-standing temple, especially where merchants from India and South Asia, more generally, today's Afghanistan and Pakistan, would come to Baku in order to engage in trade. From Baku, we crossed the Caspian Sea to Aktau. Aktau is another oil city, this time in Kazakhstan on the east coast of the Caspian Sea. So we were now into Central Asia, east of the Caspian Sea. And from Aktau, we went to Nukus. Nukus is a city of far western Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan, which lies mostly south of Kazakhstan, is a desert region. And we felt the desert, we feel the desert in basically 37, 38, 39 degrees centigrade along the way, very sunny skies and a very parched climate. But Nukos had a huge surprise for us, something that I had never heard of, but is renowned in this region and should be known throughout the world. And it's a museum of art, a museum called the Igor Savitsky Museum. And it is a absolute gem of Russian art of the early 20th century. It's an absolutely fascinating story. It's a museum with, I think, 100,000 art items collected by an artist named Igor Savitsky, who came to Uzbekistan during the Soviet period in the early 1950s. And in the Soviet times, the avant-garde art from the 1920s onward was banned by the Soviet regime. And so museums were ordered to destroy this remarkable art. But instead of destroying the art, they hid the art. They hid the art in basement chambers, in remote areas. And Savitsky, during his period in Nukus, Uzbekistan, collected this art from all over the Soviet Union, including a lot of the avant-garde artists who had come from Russia to Central Asia and had painted magnificent paintings of Central Asia. What was fascinating for me is that many of these great Russian artists trained in Europe, in France, and in Italy, and were following the expressionist, pointillist, post-expressionist, Cezanne, Cubist, Picasso, Braque period. And they were using these techniques in Central Asia. So they were depicting Central Asia using techniques that had been developed largely in Europe and then carried by Russian artists who both trained in Western Europe, practiced in Russia, and went to Uzbekistan. And Savitsky collected these. And it was mind-blowing for me because we walked into a museum that had thousands and thousands of masterpieces that I had never been aware of. It was like waking up and seeing a vast impressionist art exhibition that you had never known about before. So that was absolutely thrilling. We went from Nukus to Kiva. Kiva is an oasis on the Amu Darya River. Remember that Uzbekistan is cut by two rivers that flow from the mountains, the Pamir mountain range in Tajikistan and Afghanistan, and flow from the southeast to the northwest, depositing the water in the Aral Sea. The southern of these rivers is the Amu Darya, which in ancient times was called the Oxus River. And the northern of these rivers is the Sir Darya River, which in ancient times was called the Jakartas River. And the land between the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, or between the Oxus and the Jakartas, is much of today's Uzbekistan. And in ancient times and in classical literature, it's called Transoxiana. Oxiana referring to the Oxus. So it means the land beyond the Oxus, because it's beyond from the perspective of the Greeks. So we arrived on an oasis in Kiva on the Oxus River. And Kiva was a trading site with an ancient heritage, but with a medieval city built within the city walls for centuries. And then these city walls were fortified in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. And the inner walls of Kiva are a completely preserved medieval city with the traditional trades of carpet making, ceramics, embroidery, and other artisan shops still working today. And of course, many mosques and madrasas. It was magnificent to be there. It was my first visit there. Then we drove to the southeast along the Amu Darya and reached Bukhara. Bukhara is another ancient city. This time, part of the Amu Darya broader alluvial plains, an oasis on the Oxus or Amu Darya, but also with another tributary, the Zarafshan. So this is called a Zarafshan region oasis. And Bukhara is another masterpiece of ancient to medieval architecture. And when you watch the archaeological sites and visit these places, Kiva, Bukhara, and now Samarkand, you feel the full sweep of more than 2,000 years of history and more than 2,000 years of the Silk routes, because the trade in this region is of ancient heritage. One of the points that comes home to me is the fact that this region is a kind of not only trading region, but has been a cosmopolitan region and a hinge of many, many cultures for more than 2,000 years. And these layers of culture have come as one empire after another has swept through the region. The most ancient of these settlements is called the Sogdian or Sogdiana settlements. The Sogdians were Eastern Iranian-speaking peoples, in other words, of a language related to today's Farsi, and they were already trading in this region 2,500 years ago. And then it's one empire after another that comes through. The Persian Empire of Cyrus the Great, the Achaemenid Empire rules here. Then Alexander the Great, the Macedonian Greek conqueror, very far from here, thousands of kilometers away in his home of Macedonia, sweeps through this region in the years 329 BC to 326 BC. And actually, he has very hard battles. First, he conquers the Achaemenid Empire. He defeats the Persian Empire. But when he reaches this region of Transoxiana, he finds great resistance by the Sogdian people. And ultimately, he brings the Sogdian people to his side by marrying a beautiful princess. We know her as Roxana. I learned that her name means shining or bright little star. And she becomes the famed bride of Alexander, and the Sogdians pledged their allegiance to Alexander. And it was very nice when we reached here. The driver introduced himself. I said, "What's your name?" He said, "Alex." I said, "Oh, Alex?" I said, "What's your real name?" He said, "Well, Iskander," which is the ancient name for Alexander. So he carries the name of Alexander 2,300 years after these conquests. After the Alexandrian conquest, then there were the empires that followed the breakup of Alexander's empire. You know, those are the Hellenistic empires. And that's where the Ptolemies of Egypt came. But the empire here was the Seleucid Empire after the general Seleucus. And the Greeks ruled in this region, far from Greece, for hundreds of years. Another Greek empire was called the Greco-Bactrian Empire, which followed the Seleucid Empire. Bactria is a place in Afghanistan, and it became the site of a Greek-led empire that ruled over this region. And you know the name Bactria also because it's one of the two kinds of camels. The Bactrian camel is the two-humped camel, which we see, by the way, all along the routes of Uzbekistan. So after the Greeks, then came South Asian rule, the Kushan Empire. The Kushans brought Buddhism to this region. The Sogdian religion was Zoroastrianism. Then came Buddhism. Then came some nomadic conquests and what's called the Turkic Khaganate. And that is Turkic-speaking people like today's Uzbeks. And then who swept in the 6th century, 7th century, but the Arabs. So with the spread of Islam, the Arab conquest by the Umayyad dynasty came in the 7th century, and that was followed by the Abbasid, Baghdad-based dynasty of the Arabian rule, and they ruled in this region for hundreds of years. After the Arab rule, then came a period of Persian rule, another period of Turkic rule, and then who swept in from the east this time was Chinggis Khan, who came and captured this region in the 1220s. And so this became part of the Mongol Empire. And of course, the Mongol Empire at its zenith at the end of the 13th century in the 1290s stretched from the Pacific Ocean all the way to the Mediterranean. It was the largest land empire in world history. This region briefly became the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, meaning that within the Mongol Empire, peace was enforced and trade flourished after brutal conquests. After cities were destroyed, that was followed by peaceful trade under Pax Mongolica. Kublai Khan, remember, who hosted the Polo brothers and son, ruled over Mongolia from his capital in today's Beijing. They called it Han Balik, the capital of the Hans, and Kublai Khan ruled the Yuan dynasty until his death in 1294, I believe. After Kublai Khan's death, his kingdom divided just as Alexander's had divided, and the Mongol Empire divided into four parts. Today's modern Russia and Ukraine, the Golden Horde. South of that was the Ilkhanate, which is today's Iran. The Central Asian part was called the Chingate dynasty. That's where I am today. That became part of Chingate, named after Genghis Khan's son. And to the east of here, our destination, China, remained the Yuan dynasty. Well, all four of these eventually were reconquered or conquered by other empires. The Yuan dynasty fell in 1368 to the Ming Han Chinese dynasty, and the Chingate fell or was superseded, I should say, in the late 1300s by another Turkic dominated empire, this time by Timur, the great conqueror Timur, the brutal conqueror Timur, the patron of the arts and sciences Timur. All the contradictions rolled into one. But what Timur did was essentially assemble a new empire called the Timurid Empire, which brought together parts of the Golden Horde of Russia, the Ilkhanate of Persia, and the Chingate of Central Asia. So Timur created the Timurid Empire, which lasted for about a century, and Samarkand was its capital. And Samarkand became one of the most beautiful places in the world during this period. In 1417, so roughly 608 years ago or 609 years ago, the governor of Samarkand, the grandson of Timur, was Ulag Beg, a name I'd like everyone to know, because Ulag Beg was the greatest astronomer of his age, the greatest astronomer of the 15th century. And he had a giant observatory that he built in Samarkand, and he built a university called the Ulag Beg Madrasa, which I visited yesterday evening to tape the lecture. And it is a magnificent Persian architectural gem. And it was a place of study, not only of Islamic theology, but of astronomy, mathematics, and the sciences more generally. So Ulag Beg is a great scientist. He measured the Earth's orbital time, the 365 days, 6 hours, some minutes, within 25 seconds, I believe it was, in accuracy, the greatest accuracy of the age. So we're also celebrating Ulag Beg today by launching with the government leadership here a new Ulag Beg Research Institute of Sustainable Development, which is very exciting for me. I'm very thrilled about this 600 years after Ulag Beg's great scientific period. Well, after the end of the Timurid dynasty. Samarkand became ruled mostly from neighboring Bukhara, became part of the Bukhara Emirate. And the Bukhara Emirate lasted till the middle of the 19th century when the Russians arrived, and this region became part of the Russian Empire. Briefly, these places declared independence at the end of the Romanov Empire when the Romanovs were overthrown by the Bolsheviks at the end of World War I. But the Bolsheviks had other ideas, and they invaded and brought Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Turkmenistan into the Soviet Union. So the Bolsheviks arrived in Central Asia and forcibly incorporated these places into the new Soviet Union. They gained their independence in 1991. So you can see it's a lot of history, absolutely remarkable. I'm very happy to say, and I'll close here with the monologue, and we'll have some discussion. We visited yesterday a 21st century part of Uzbekistan, which was a massive solar farm outside of Samarkand, 220 megawatts of solar power, 440,000 solar modules in this vast array, financed by a combination of the Uzbek government, the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank, the Asian Development Bank, the European Investment Bank, and the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development. So partners from Europe to China, really exciting. And it's actually owned and operated by a Dubai clean energy company, Masdar. And so it's a Emirates-run, European and Asian financed Uzbek giant renewable energy program. So we saw all of the pieces of the great interconnectivity and sustainability yesterday, and we'll be championing that along the way. Let me end there. That brings you up to date on the trip, and turn it back over to Charlena.
I think I'm actually going to handle the questions, but thank you, Jeff.
Yeah. Oh, great.
Thank you. Yeah. Wow, it's really exciting, and I don't know where to start with all of that. But thank you so much for sharing. We look forward to the lecture that we're going to get soon that you filmed in Samarkand. Lot of questions, and again, everyone, I hope I get to as many of these as possible. If we don't have time, I'm very sorry. I'll start with one. Can you describe some of the food that you've been eating and the people that you've been meeting and some of these experiences as you make this journey across very vastly different cultures and geographies?
Yeah, first of all, the food is wonderful. The vegetables taste like vegetables. This, for an American, is something unusual. I don't know exactly what material our industrial tomatoes are made of, but they don't taste like tomatoes. Strawberries don't taste like strawberries in the United States. They are designed for shelf life. They're designed for shipping. Here, they are eating. So we're eating the most remarkable sun. I'm on all the shish kebabs, and people are enjoying that. I'm enjoying the nuts and aquaculture sturgeon from the Caspian Sea, and that is a real treat, and some wonderful river fish here in Central Asia. We're meeting wonderful people, of course, the people that are hosting us, many academics. We've been at universities all across the trip, so SDSN members, and having great conversations with the academics and with government officials and with lots of artisans, because we're stopping in artisanal shops. Yesterday, we were in an absolutely remarkable Bukhara carpet uh, company where this brilliant young woman named Sabina had, at the end of the Soviet period, the family was poor, but her grandmother had knowledge of the ancient Bukhara carpet making, which had been largely suppressed. And she was determined to resurrect that. And she studied the ancient designs, uh, found people that knew the ancient weaving techniques, and now has a world class, world scale operation of the most beautiful silk carpets you can imagine. And my wife and I have been there before to visit, and we were thrilled to go back and to see these absolute magnificent gems of artwork. We also visited another ceramics making family, which is in its seventh generation of ceramics artisanry, also some weaving, some embroidery, but seven generations of artisans, again, outside of Samarkand. And this is absolutely wonderful to see. We've been seeing lots of culture because we've been serenaded by musicians. We've watched fantastic traditional dancing. Uh, it's been as our middle term of our trip, the trip of peace, culture, and sustainable development. It's been filled with culture.
Fantastic. I know we're all hoping to see some of that on the journey. So we can put links for those of you who haven't had a chance to check out the Marco Polo social media journey in addition to the
Right.
course.
Yeah, put
Um,
that into the course website, all of that,
yes.
and
Yeah.
all the links.
Yeah, all the links are in there, and we'll put them in the chat here too. A lot of different types of questions. One is as you move a little bit about the linguistic journey, and are you encountering, I assume, a lot of Russian as you move through this region? And you talked a little bit about how kind of cultures and religions and also language has been moving through here. So, what are you
Yeah,
seeing? What
well,
kind of influences?
you see all the languages, and what really surprised me, but because I should have known better, but I didn't uh, realize when we got to Bukhara, for example, our guide spoke many languages, but I asked her what her mother tongue was, expecting the answer to be Uzbek or maybe Russian. But she said her mother tongue is Farsi, in other words, Iranian language. And I was shocked. She said, no, for so many of us, for most of us, it's Farsi. This is a Persian region. And of course, as I mentioned, this has been part of Eastern Persia for 2,500 years. So you see exactly the Amudarya, the Oxus, is a hinge. In the north are Turkic tribes, and in the south are Persian speaking. And so this duality of Persian and Turkic languages has been core to the linguistic and the geopolitical history of this region, and it continues until today. But yes, from the last 2 centuries came Russian. That was not traditional. That was only from the 19th century onward. And now, one of the things that's happening also, especially as we move eastward, of course, but we're seeing more and more Chinese speakers and also more and more Chinese tourists. Yesterday, when we were in Registan Square, there were lots of Chinese tourists coming up. and interestingly, because Chinese social media is so active, I show up a lot on social Chinese media. So a lot of Chinese tourists were coming up. Oh, Professor Sachs, so nice to see you here. It was very, very interesting, very unusual. But you feel exactly this kind of linguistic underpinning of the cultures along the way. And I would say, as we are here today, it's Persian or Farsi and Uzbek, which is a Turkic language, as being dominant. A lot of English, a lot of Chinese, a lot of Russian, and so all of the influences felt.
I mean, kind of to that end, are you seeing a lot of influence of the West, both culturally, but also economically, anything, especially more modern influences?
Well, one of the things I noticed that surprised me when we reached Uzbekistan was every car seemed to be a Chevrolet. And I was really, really surprised. Chevrolet, Chevrolet, Chevrolet. I said, what is going on here? And of course, what happened was that GM established early on or Chevrolet established a manufacturing facility protected by tariffs. So it became the vehicle that could be afforded as a kind of family sedan, and it dominated the domestic market. That's changing now. Actually, Samarkand hosts a BYD manufacturing site. Uh, Electric vehicles are becoming very popular. No doubt, I think that they will replace the internal combustion engines. But that is one of the most evident influences that we saw. Uh, there isn't, at this point, not a lot of Western stores and shops. We're really pretty far from Europe, and I don't see too much United States presence right now, though there's of course, some geopolitical presence, but not a high level of evidence on the streets. Once in a while, we've seen a Starbucks, and so you do see a little bit of mass market America, but not so much.
Starbucks was going to be my main indicator, so good, yeah,
Right.
not too much. Um, we're seeing both people, from around the world who hadn't heard some of these stories before, but also getting comments from people who are from this region who are learning so many things about their own history. Um, in your experience, do you think that popular media has done justice to this story and particularly to the Mongols? Or do you think we're missing out on some of the nuance of their story?
Yeah, it's so interesting, of course, to see the perspective. Oop, can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, good. It's so interesting, of course, to see the perspective from a different point of view. When we reached Aktau, we were shown the home place of Attila of the Huns. Well, all we know of Attila the Hun is that it became the epithet for the worst kind of conqueror. You're an Attila the Hun. But to see Attila from the hometown perspective is quite different. To see Timur not as Tamerlane as we call him in the West, Timur the Lame, because ostensibly because he walked with a limp through a war injury that he incurred early on, and known as the Great Destroyer. But to see the Timurid Empire as the great center of culture is a different perspective. The, the truth is, empires generally have two faces to them. They have the brutality of conquest and expansion, and then usually when they reach their geographic maximum. They stop the war part, and then they enjoy the cultural flowering part through this big internal market and expanded trade. So the Roman Empire was very violent to those who it was conquering, but then it became the great expanse of Roman Latin civilization. And the Hun Empire, uh, you take a different perspective. And for me, it's quite interesting because in Rome, at the Vatican, in my favorite rooms of the Vatican, which are the ones painted by Raphael in his frescoes. There's a fresco of the Pope in, I believe, 451, if I remember the date, but I may have it wrong, uh, shown convincing Attila to retreat from Rome and not to sack Rome. And the Pope Leo, uh, in fact, Pope Leo the Great convinces Attila to retreat. Whether he really convinced him to retreat or whether Attila's supply lines were so threatened and so extended, historians debate. But in any event, now I've seen Attila in both sides. And with the Mongols, this was a period of great flowering, but we know the Mongol conquest in the West as Genghis Khan was the brutal conqueror. And so each side has different stories to it. And Samarkand is the epitome of that. Tamerlane is known for his ruthlessness, violence of conquest, but this is the flowering of the most beautiful Central Asian Renaissance imaginable. So you get to see both sides in this way, which otherwise you wouldn't get from our normal school book treatments or maybe just the inherited words here and there that are used in a pejorative way.
So how can we square that circle of history, recognizing that conquest can lead to cultural flowering? I think we don't want to support further conquest, but we want to enjoy the flowering. How what can we learn from that?
Ah, that's the great insight of Adam Smith, I would say. Adam Smith is the founder of modern economics, and his great book, The Wealth of Nations, celebrates its 250th anniversary this year, just like the 250th birthday of the United States. I regard The Wealth of Nations as one of the great contributions because Adam Smith said to the British, who were the rising global hegemon in his day, you don't need empires, you just need to trade. Make the world open, make the world safe for trade, have a global rule of law, uh, end piracy, end predatory behavior. And then you can have the benefits of this cosmopolitan world market without the conquest that goes along with it. So he told the British in 1776, let the colonies go. They're not doing you any economic advantage. Let them go, let them be independent, and then you'll trade with them in free trade. Very good advice, of course. Like much good economic advice, it was not listened to. The British fought the colonists. 5 years later, because the French intervened on the side of the British colonies, Britain ended the war in a peace treaty in 1781, thereby giving birth to the United States. But Adam Smith answered your question, Shannon. Free trade is a good substitute for empire.
As long as it also doesn't overrun and conquer its trade
No,
partners.
exactly. But now the United States has lost its nerve. We have a crazy president, in my view, not very bright one, and he thinks you have to conquer again. But this is absurd. We should be trading with China. We should be trading with Russia. We should be establishing the idea of peace, not the idea of hegemony or attempted hegemony. And then we could have the benefits of the world diversity and interconnectedness without the wars that go along with this hegemonic idea.
Yeah. Um, Hard to follow that, but I do want to hear a little bit more about this Ulugh Beg Center for Sustainable Development, maybe as we come to a close
Yes.
here. Tell us, what is that going to do? What's the plan?
So Central Asia is recognizing its need for environmental action, partly because of the tragedy, for example, of the drying up of the two rivers, the Amu Darya and the Sir Darya, and of the Aral Sea, because of the overuse of those river waters for irrigation and because of long-term climate change. So this region is experiencing drying. It's experiencing the crisis of the Aral Sea. As the Aral Sea has dramatically retreated in size, it's also exposed the region to dust storms and to toxic chemicals because of pesticides and other chemicals that were part of the pollution of the Aral Sea. So the region understands together, these countries of Central Asia, they must become sustainable. They're also understanding that they have vast renewable energy resources like the solar energy that I mentioned, and also hydropower from the Pamir Mountains and other mountain ranges that can also be tapped. So they're increasingly working together. And this is one of my big themes, that countries need to work with their neighbors because you share the ecosystems, you share the solar energy, you share the river sheds, you share even the ills of dust storms and sandstorms. And so you need regional cooperation. So the Ulugh Beg Research Center will be researching climate action, both the adaptation and resilience policies, as well as the energy transformation and land use and agriculture transformation. And it will be doing it together with the SDSN and with Columbia University as partners, and there will be other partners as well. But the theme will be sustainable development in Central Asia, and looking at Central Asia as a whole integrated region, not as five separate countries. And that's extremely exciting and very well motivated.
I think looking forward to hearing more about that and working with them. I think that's the ultimate lesson from this journey and from everything we do at SDSN and the SDG Academy is this sense of interconnectedness and mutual reliance on each other, I think, to find the solutions. So I know
Absolutely.
you need to get on your way. Where are you headed to next? And any parting words?
Well, today we launched the Ulugh Beg Center. Then we head east to Tashkent, the capital of Uzbekistan, and meet with the political leaders. Then we continue on to Almaty in Kazakhstan. Then we reach Korgos, which is the border of Kazakhstan and China, and we enter into the Silk Route in China. So that will be the next time that we get together. We'll be in China.
All right. So everyone, we will have a new lecture from Samarkand dropping next week in the course, and then after that we'll move with Professor Sachs into China. We have one more live session that we will schedule and send out that information shortly. In the meantime, thank you so much for joining. Some of you quite early, I think, joining from Europe and Africa and the Caucasus region. And
Thanks.
yeah, wonderful to see everyone. Thank you so much, Professor Sachs, and we will see you again
Great.
soon. Safe
See
travels.
you soon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.